This video will discuss the basic essentials of an owner-contractor agreement. There are basically three types of agreements. We have contractor proposals, we have short form agreements, and we have standard form agreements. The contractor proposal is prepared by the contractor, and it's to be used when the project is relatively small and relatively inexpensive. So if you have a project that is simple in nature and let's say under $50,000, and the contractor is going to be performing basically one service, he's going to be installing plumbing, or he's going to be doing masonry work, or he's a drywaller that's going to be framing a room and doing the drywall, that type of situation, a contractor proposal might be appropriate. You have to remember that a contractor proposal being prepared by the contractor is going to be heavily biased in favor of the contractor and not you, the owner. So you want to only limit the use of that type of agreement form, the proposal, for these small projects. If the project is under $1 million, but it's more complicated than just a very simple project, you'd probably want to consider using a short form agreement that is prepared initially by one of the professional associations that concentrates on doing that type of thing. The American Institute of Architects prepares a number of short form agreements. The Association of Licensed Architects has its series of agreements, as well as the Association of General Contractors. They have agreements, and there are several other organizations that prepare agreements that you could choose from. The benefit of these agreements is that they're more neutral in nature. They don't favor the contractor over the owner or the owner over the contractor. They try to create a mutually beneficial agreement that's fair and yet describes in greater detail what it is that the contractor will be building and what the owner will be paying for. For larger contracts that exceed $1 million in cost, and contracts that are, situations where the project you're describing is going to be very complex, I think it would behoove you to use a standard form of agreement prepared by either the Association of Licensed Architects or the American Institute of Architects or even the Association of General Contractors. Those agreements have great specificity within them, and they describe in greater detail the work that has to be done and the duties and obligations of the parties to that agreement. The owner has certain duties and obligations that are described in detail there, as well as the contractor's duties and obligations. The more specific the agreement is, the greater the likelihood that the two parties will reach agreement in their, the meetings of the minds will occur, and both parties will understand what the other party wants. It reduces the chances of disputes, and it promotes harmony with not only between the parties, but in the entire process between subcontractors and consultants and architects. Everybody that's in this mix, if they all know what they're supposed to do and they all understand it, you have a greater chance of a successful project. Any agreement has certain basic essentials, which is what we're talking about here. And you begin by describing who the parties to the agreement are. You have an owner and you have a contractor. Those are the only two parties that are executing this agreement. And if you're an owner and you're doing it on behalf of your company, then you want to make the company the owner, and you want to sign on behalf of the company. If you have a corporate entity, you want to have the protection of the corporation. So you'll sign as an individual, but as an individual on behalf of the corporation. Contractors normally have business entities as well, and they will normally sign on behalf of the corporation as well. So if you sign in the beginning of the agreement, when you describe who the parties are, you'll name the corporations, assuming that you have a corporate entity. And at the end of the agreement where you sign, you're not going to sign John Smith and Joseph Blow. You're not going to sign it that way. You're going to sign on behalf of those same corporate entities that you named at the beginning of the thing. We have some confusion here sometimes. If you sign as an individual, you could be held liable as an individual. So you don't want that to happen. You want to have a brief project description of what the project's all about. You want to have a statement in the agreement somewhere near the beginning that the parties are bound by the terms and conditions contained within this agreement. The contract documents should be described. The owner is issuing a set of contract documents that the contractor is bidding on, and he's entering into this agreement to provide services called for in those contract documents. And what do those contract documents include? They include drawings and specifications, assuming that you have an architect involved in the project. If you're dealing with a small project with a contractor proposal, you're probably not going to have much in the way of documents and specifications especially. The greater the complexity, the more costly the project, the more drawings you're going to have, the more specifications you're going to have that describe the materials that are being used in the project. And you're going to have most likely another separate document that is incorporated into this owner-contractor agreement as part of the agreement, which is referred to as general conditions for the contract for construction. That document describes what the owner's duties are, what the contractor's duties are, and if there's an architect involved in the project, what the architect's duties are, and how all of the parties will interact and react to one another. It will probably describe how you can resolve disputes. It'll describe in greater detail what the insurance provisions are for all of the parties. And it'll describe termination provisions and progress payments and retainage, holding back on full payments under contractors' applications for payment and so forth. So those would be listed under the section that is referred to as the contract documents. Two important dates occur in any agreement, and one is the date of commencement of construction, and the other date that occurs is the date of substantial completion of the project. We all know what the commencement of construction means. It's the date when construction actually begins. The contractor starts building the project. That's a simple date to know. And you should know it should be listed in the agreement so that the contractor starts promptly on time. The date of substantial completion gives him a target date to complete the project. And if there's any changes in the scope of work or something comes up, unforeseen conditions, whatever might impact that date of substantial completion, there should be a corresponding change order issued, which would either extend or contract the date. The date of substantial completion is a point in time when the owner can actually move into the space and utilize it for its intended purpose. It's not the date when the project is finally complete. That's referred to as the date of final completion. And at the beginning of the project, you don't know when that date's going to be, because at the date of substantial completion, which you do know, and you will set what date that has to be, there may be certain items that still remain to be completed, such as painting of a wall here and there, or installing some hardware that wasn't installed at the time the owner was capable of moving into the project and using it for its intended purpose. You may have some lighting equipment changes, or some wiring that still has to be completed, some tuning up of the mechanical system, those types of items. Those would all be assembled on a list, which is referred to as a punch list, which is generally prepared by the contractor doing the work, as well as the architect. If the architect's involved in a project, he will be reviewing that list from the contractor and adding to it those items that he sees as needing to be redone or completed as well. Every agreement should have a section on compensation, which describes how the contractor is going to be paid for the work that he's doing. The contractor could be paid hourly. He can be paid on a lump sum basis. He could be paid on the cost of the work plus a fee, with or without a guaranteed maximum price. The more complex the project, the more likely the contractor will not be paid on an hourly basis. And the more likely, even on a very complex project, the more likely the owner may want to have the contractor paid on a fee and the actual cost of the work, with or without a guaranteed maximum price. And I say with or without, it's a choice. You either have a guaranteed maximum price or you don't. And that there's a difference in the fee structure that the contractor may provide the owner, depending on if he has to actually guarantee the maximum price. If it's just the cost of the work plus a fee without a guaranteed maximum price, you may get a lower fee from the contractor to do the work. The cost of the work is the actual cost that the contractor has to pay his subcontractors and material suppliers to supply the labor and the material to do the work. There's no markup on it. The contractor's fee will accommodate any markups that he would have had. Compensation should also have some provisions in there for alternate prices, unit prices, or allowances. Alternate prices are asked for frequently when it's possible that the project may be complex enough that the parties aren't sure that it'll come in at the owner's budget. It might come in over the owner's budget. Come in meaning that after the contractor accumulates all of his costs for labor and material and his fees and so forth, all collectively together, they exceed the owner's budget. Having an alternate price, you can change the scope of work, which will alter the total cost to the owner and reduce it down to bring it back within his budget. You can do that through a series of alternate prices and alternate scopes of work. Unit prices occur when you don't know how many given units of a particular item you may have on the project until you're actually finalizing the construction of the project while you're doing it. So if you're not sure of the door count because all of the final drawings haven't been finalized at that point, there may be some room changes that are occurring while construction is occurring. Let's say you have 75 doors that the contractor bid on. He has a dollar amount per door. Towards the end of the project, you find out that you're really going to have 80 doors instead of 75. Well, if you go back and you can determine what the unit price was for one door, and you'll now have a fair price to increase the door amount from 75 to 80 because you know the price of each individual door. So that comes in handy when you're dealing with that type of situation. Sometimes you have an owner, or you have a situation where the architect hasn't been able to completely finalize. Let's take something that's commonly a problem, and that would be kitchen design for a hospital, let's say. And the decision hasn't been made as to what type of equipment will be used in the kitchen of the hospital. But you know that some equipment will be utilized. And whether it's a single-family residence where the owner hasn't selected the equipment, or it's a complex hospital kitchen, you're going to be able to determine a dollar amount, at least for the minimum amount. Let's say we're talking about a single-family home. You're going to have a refrigerator, a stove, an oven, maybe a built-in microwave, a garbage disposal, a dishwasher. You put that all together, and you take your best guess. If you go medium equipment, medium-priced equipment, that might work out to $15,000. So you can put an allowance for $15,000 in place that the contractor will include in his bid, not knowing what equipment it's going to be, but there's $15,000 in there as a placeholder, which is referred to as an allowance. And once the owner or the architect finally selects the equipment, let's say instead of using Kenmore equipment, which is relatively inexpensive, you want to go to all Viking equipment for a single-family home. It's much more expensive. So if you go up in price, the allowance would be replaced by the actual dollar amount. Let's say you go from a $15,000 placeholder to $30,000 worth of kitchen equipment. You need to issue a change order to increase the contractor's contract amount by $15,000. That's $15,000 more than what the allowance was. That's the way that works. During the entire course of the project, especially on longer projects, the contractor will be issuing an application for payment, which on bigger projects will most likely go to the architect first before it goes on to the owner. The architect will review the contractor's monthly application for payment, go out to the project site, examine the work in place, check to see if the quantity and quality is commensurate with the request for payment at that particular time, and also evaluate whether there's enough money left after that payment is made to complete the project. Should the contractor go bankrupt or terminate the work on the project, or for whatever reason, the architect is trying to balance out, what amount of payment is justified to the contractor, and yet, on the other hand, what amount of payment is justified to hold back, just in case the contractor fails to complete the project. You want to have enough money left to bring another contractor in to do that, to complete it. In addition to having that judgment that has to be made, it's normal for retainage to be held back on large projects. And what is retainage? Retainage is an amount that'll be held back from the contractor's application for payment, which is normally, the retainage amount will normally be 5 or 10% of the requested amount. And that's held back until the date of substantial completion for the project. And by holding it back, you keep all of the subcontractors, actively working towards substantial completion to try to get their money. You keep the contractor motivated to reach substantial completion, as stated on the date or earlier. Because he wants to get his money too. So once you reach substantial completion, that retainage is released. It's a big incentive to get him to that point. Now, when you release the retainage, you want to make sure that you're still holding back enough money to complete the punch list items. There's a great danger that if a subcontractor has a $500 punch list item, has to replace a window, for instance, and you're holding $500 back to do it, he may just walk. If it costs the subcontractor $1,500 to go back and replace the $500 window that you're holding money back for, he may not show up. So you want to have enough money that you're holding back, which is some multiple of what the actual cost of the work is, to incentivize the subs or the general contractor to come back and fix that work. every contract should have a statement in there, a section that describes the type of insurance policies that both the owner and the contractor will be providing for the work that's being done on this project. The owner is going to have property insurance on existing buildings that are having additions attached to them. So he's going to need property insurance. The contractor should have general commercial liability, and the dollar amounts should be stated. Whatever the owner feels is necessary should be in there. The contractor should have automobile insurance and whatever other insurance the owner thinks he ought to have should be fully described in the owner-contractor agreement up front. We have indemnification provisions that should be considered. On small documents with contractors' proposals, many times a contractor is asking an owner to indemnify the contractor for lawsuits that come in that is not the responsibility of the contractor caused by the contractor's negligence. Seems like a fair request, but it makes the owner become an insurance company for the contractor for third-party suits that the owner is unaware of might be issued as well. So I think you want to delete that section if you're an owner. If you're a contractor, I can certainly understand why you'd ask for it. On larger projects, medium size, where you're using short form agreements or standard agreements, it's customary that a contractor provides an indemnity to the owner for lawsuits the owner finds himself involved with, which are directly caused by the contractor's negligence. It's customary that contractors provide those indemnity provisions, so you want to make sure you get it. A good thing to have in your owner-contractor agreement is a method by which you can resolve disputes. You might want to talk about the parties having to sit down together and try to work it out, verbally. If that doesn't work, you might want to have a mandatory mediation, which is conducted by a third party who will bring the contractor and the architect hopefully together so that those two parties can voluntarily reach agreement as to how to resolve that dispute. Mediation, in my opinion, should always be a condition precedent to arbitration or litigation of that dispute. And you either arbitrate it or you litigate it. There are two different ways to resolve it, but you don't use both. You use one or the other. Every agreement should have termination provisions. The owner wants to be able to terminate a non-performing contractor, and the contractor wants to be able to terminate a non-performing owner, in which case it most likely is that the owner's not paying the contractor, so he wants to be able to terminate the agreement and then be able to proceed legally against the owner for that non-payment. The owner also wants to make sure, on the other hand, that the contractor is performing properly. If he's building shoddy work, if he's untimely, he's not proceeding with completing the project, maybe it's time to get a different contractor. So you should address those issues before you have a problem. Towards the very end of your agreement, you want to have an integration clause which says that this agreement, this owner-contractor agreement, and all of the documents contained within it, the drawings, specifications, and so forth, it'll just state that the integration clause says that this agreement supersedes any and all prior agreements, oral or written, so that you have a clean starting point. And then finally, you need to have a decent execution of the agreement. You should have a title that acceptance of the agreement is indicated by the signatures below. You have the parties sign off. Remember what I said before, the parties signing the agreement should be the same parties listed at the beginning of the agreement. So if you're a corporate entity, you sign as a corporation by an individual represented to or authorized to sign. Same thing for the contractor, and that's it. So we've discussed the basic essentials of an owner-contractor agreement.